New managers, are you experiencing this right now? An overly assertive employee on your team that everyone knows about. The performance may be okay, it's not off, but the attitude of that person is actually draining the morale of the team. And so, yet, week after week, you say nothing. Because here's what you dread confrontation. You dread the fact that you aren't able to have a dialogue because you don't like conflict. And so, this is not a trick question for you. Have you ever realized that by keeping the peace, keeping the peace, you're actually destroying the team's trust? Well, welcome, everyone, to another episode of Finding Freedom Through Confidence. We're back this week again. It's week 4 in the series, The Hidden Gaps of High Performers Turned Managers. And so, if you've been with us over the last 3 weeks, and this is week 4, you've realized that, or you've known that we have dismantled in the first week the armor of confidence. Week 2, we talked about the vision disconnect. And last week, week 3, we built performance systems. And so this week, we're going to tackle the hardest part of leadership for many first time managers. And so I have a piece of data, the last piece from Manager Stone's assessment, because we have been using his data to showcase seeing yourself in that space, showcasing how we as first time managers show up. And so Manager Stone scores an 9 out of 10. He scores a 9 out of 10 for influencing his peers. He's a charismatic leader. He's well liked. But when it comes to having those difficult conversations, he scores a 1 out of 10. He's what I call a charismatic avoider. He uses his likability as a shield to avoid the friction of leadership, and not because he's not a good leader, but because, again, he defaults to avoidance. And so today we're going to be talking about the 3-part architecture of ownership to help you stop avoiding those unpleasant conversations, those difficult conversations, and start leading from a place of a wealthy leader's mindset. And so for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Tanique Easy. I am a leadership development expert for first time and managers. And I support first time and mid level managers by unlocking their efficiency so they can become high impact leaders without burnout. So we want our first time leaders, especially our first time managers, to move from exhausted doer to sustainable leader. So let me know in the comments where you're. We always like to know where our listeners are watching from. Let us know the city and the country that you're joining from. And if you are live, type hashtag live. And if you are watching the replay, type hashtag replay. And remember that our thought for 20p confidence is currency. And so, what's the core lesson that we want to talk about today as we talk about the 3 architecture of ownership for managers who hate conflict? Who don't like, conflict. Oh, we are moving a little fast. Well, here's the truth. Here's a truth that I'm going to say it softly. I'm going to say this truth soft, but with a little bit of a force. And so this is a framework Scott called The Radical Candor, where she talks about the how to actually bridge that gap between your natural empathetic self and accountability. And as I said, the transition that happens with high performers be turning into managers, it's a default. And it's not a bad thing, but it's also not the wealthy leader's mindset. And therefore, how do we move from that space? So before we get into the framework, before we get into a little bit more about the framework, here's something that I want you to consider. Why first time managers avoid conflict? Why do they avoid conflict? Because there's a transition gap. There is a transition gap because here's what they do. They find themselves suddenly separated. So you're now separated from your group. You were once a part of a peer group, especially for those who are promoted from within. Especially for those who are promoted from within, you're now separated from your peer group. And so you are there and you're trying to navigate, okay, how do I now transition from peer to leader? And so this shift, it often feels, I know it often feels intimidating, it often feels awkward. And so the pitfalls here is that, well, I I want to focus, I want to continue to focus on my comfort zone, handling the technical work myself and being a part of that group. I want to still be liked by my peers. And there's nothing wrong with you being liked by your peers. But again, there is this fundamental shift, mindset shift, a wealthy leaders mindset shift that needs to happen. And so these are some of the transitional gaps why high performers default to avoidance. And so one of the pitfall is that you rely on your likability. You, instead of enforcing the standards, you you find yourself more so in that space of, okay, I don't want to have this conversation um, because it's not easy. And I know for sure that it is not easy. I know that this transition is by no means easy for you. But as a first time manager, if we're going to successfully transition into that leadership role, there are three things that need to happen as we move into that space. There are three things that need to happen as we move into that space. And so again, one of the pointers that was, as I was doing this research, one of the pointers, and it's researched as well, the research shows that unaddressed performance issues cause more turnover than the issue themselves. And why is that? Because poor performance now becomes the baseline. And because as first time managers, as move transitioning from peer to leader, we find that we we don't want to ruffle the feathers. We don't want to rock the boat too much. And so what happens is that the high performers on our team, they leave because there is this teammate, and we don't want to say they're a problem teammate. They may be a little bit more assertive than others. However, their attitude, not their assertiveness is the problem. Attitude that actually drains the morale of the team. And so persons leave because as a manager, I find it a challenge. I find it difficult to address those issues. And so the moral of the team now becomes so toxic that persons really are not engaged as they show up to work. And so what are the three things that are needed as you transition from that peer to becoming that leader, to owning that wealthy leader mindset? The first thing is that it requires a mindset shift where you acknowledge that my primary responsibility now is to shift from an individual contributor to the success of the team. The second thing is the second thing is a proper mindset and leadership training. Is to invest in those mindset and leadership training. They need to be a part of that transitional process. And the third thing is ongoing support through coaching and frameworks that will help us as first time managers with these challenges as we navigate this space from peer to leader is to handle people management side of this role. And so because without these tools, we are going to default. We are going to default into what we call the technical work. We default back into the comfortableness of being that peer, being that person who is doing the work alongside, just doing it, rather than engaging in more difficult task of delegating, of being strict, being strict with what needs to happen. And so, if we're going to help our first time managers to shift into high impact leadership, it requires a deliberate letting go. It requires a deliberate letting go of, okay, I am now the leader of this team. I know it is difficult. My personality type is that, and it can be a saboteur as well, because I find that for myself, one of my saboteur is to avoid conflict. And so that happens for me in my own leadership journey. And therefore, coming up with these frameworks and these ways of shifting from peer to leader, I am walking through that process myself. And so to shift into that high impact leadership state, taking ownership, executing as the leader, not just as the peer, but as the leader, focusing on removing the obstacles and providing strategic clarity for the team to move forward. And because the first time manager is still operating as one of the group, they avoid the difficult conversation. And so when they come up, that's what happens. And so here's the thing. When we avoid that conflict, it's not that we're protecting the team. No, we are not. We are actually, what is happening is that we're actually making a massive withdrawal from our leadership trust account, because we are doing the avoidance. We are silent. We're like, okay, if I don't say anything, maybe this will take care of itself. And so the performance issues, they keep growing and piling up. They keep growing and piling up. But when we switch when we switch our mindset, when we have that mindset shift and we make that conscious decision that this is hard, because I'm telling you, it is hard to have those difficult conversations. You will feel your heart palpitating a little harder. You will feel that your palms start to sweat. However, when we have these constructive dialogues, when we make them constructive, what is going to happen is that we're going to start making those significant deposits into clarity. We're going to start engaging. When we start engaging in those difficult conversations, it actually sends a signal to not just my brain, not just my mind about safety and building compound trust in myself as the leader. However, it's going to build that safety and that compounding trust within the team as well, because persons are going to see, okay, no, she has taken a stand as the leader. She's taken a stand as the leader. And yes, as much as we would want to be, friends, or because we're still gonna be friends. But when it comes on to navigating that space, there is a line that we draw as to, okay, we are friends, but I am also now the manager of the team. Now I am the leader, and there are certain expectations that my leader is expecting me to do, to carry out, and they're expecting you to do that as well. And so these are these are some pivot points that we're going to be talking about. How do we move from that? How do we make those constructive deposits? How do we make those deposits? How do we engage in those difficult conversations, even though we hate conflict? Even though when we are doing it, our heart is just feel like it's gonna jump out of our chest. The more we do it, the safer we feel inside, and we build the trust in our own leadership account. I like to reference these as your balance sheet. So when you look at your balance sheet, when you look at your leadership balance sheet, you are more incorporating assets than liabilities, because avoidance and silence that's liability. But when we do make these deposits, when we do have these constructive conversation, as difficult as they are, we are improving and increasing our assets in our leadership trust balance sheet account. So what are the three parts that we're going to be talking about? As I said, we're talking about the three-part architecture of ownership for managers who hate conflicts. That's what we're talking about this week. Now, how are we going to move from being a charismatic avoider to a leader who builds trust, to a leader who makes deposits in our own leadership trust account, not just for self, but for those whom we lead as well? How do we handle conflict constructively and compassionately without falling into what Kim Scott calls the trap of ruinous empathy? So let's take a look at the three structured ways to engage. Practice radical candor. So we're going to shift from the ruinous empathy to direct challenge. We're going to handle those conflicts constructively. The second thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to externalize accountability. So we are now taking on coaching instead of being the dictator or the enforcer. We now become a leader who is a coach. And we use those data, we use those coaching questions. The last time we talked about the lazy coaching question, the lazy coaching technique, the lazy leadership technique of asking the question. So when they come with a challenge, we ask them the question, what? We ask them the what question so that they can think about the answer. So the team member can actually come up with the solution. So instead of us always finding the solution, we are allowing the team members to find the solution. And then the third one is we're going to deploy the CARE framework. This is another framework that is adopted from another WISL, where they talk about the CARE framework as we use this to help us as we talk about conflict, as we deal with hard and difficult conversations as first-time managers who hate conflict, who hate to talk about difficult conversation, who hate to have those difficult conversations. We deploy the CARE framework. And within this framework are 4 steps that we will be going through. So let's talk about part 1, which is practice radical candor. As you can see, there are 4 quadrants. And the tool that we are going to be looking on today is the ruinous empathy and the radical candor. So this is where, we avoid that We avoid the challenges instead of sharing them wholeheartedly. We become so empathetic and we avoid it. Just like Manager Stone, he is charismatic, he delegates, but when it comes on to having difficult conversation, he scored a 1 out of 10. And so he's stuck right here in the ruinous empathy. So he's only saying the good things and he's avoid raising the difficult issues. Like believe that people, so because the thing is that it's not that we don't believe that people can't handle the truth. It's maybe that sometimes we are so afraid to share the truth because of it may bring up some form of frustration within us. It may bring up some form of internal insecurity within us as leaders. And so when we move from this part of ruinous empathy, we move to this is where we want to move to challenge our team directly. We want to move to radical candor, where we affirm and appreciate what they have done, yes, but also we challenge them. We ask them for feedback. So instead of sugarcoating what is happening, we share the feedback in such a way that motivates them to do better next time. So we evaluate to motivate in this space when we move from when we move from ruinous empathy to radical candor. So because it's not that we are what is happening here is that we are challenging their work in an act of care. Again, evaluating to motivate, not evaluating to diminish. And so, yes, in when we care personally, we build genuine relationship and we share the value of what their success looks like. But here's when we have that radical candor and we're challenging them directly. What do we say? Here's what we say. This is an example. Is I feel frustrated when deadlines are missed because I value our team's reputation. So bringing the person into that space, not targeting them as a person, but asking, okay, this isn't working. Let's talk about what's happening. Because indeed we are frustrated when deadlines are missed and our team reputation is on the line. But here's the thing that I want to share with us as first-time managers, as mid-level managers, that we cannot lead from emotion alone. We cannot lead from a place of emotion alone, because whatever energy that we bring as leaders is going to be reflected back at us, amplified. So whatever energy we are going to be bringing to that space, because if we're leading from just emotion only, and we're just sugarcoating, and we are, or if we're doing an evaluation and we are nitpicking, then that is what's going to happen to us. I've shared with you several times about my story as the lead teller, where when my team members weren't doing things the way I wanted them to do. And so I gave them the silent treatment and they gave that back to me. And so as leaders, when we lead from a place of emotion only, that's the energy that's going to be brought back to us. That's the energy that's going to be reflected back to us as leaders. And so sometimes, again, as I said before, this could be us leading from a place of internal insecurity. But we shift that mindset, because we're shifting the mindset to a wealthy leader's mindset. We are shifting and we're making intentional deposits in our leadership trust account, in our leadership balance sheet. And we're going to ask, okay, we're going to take it. And yes, every time we practice radical candor, every time we practice not sugarcoating, every time we practice the feedback, the feedback that gives motivation, the feedback that motivates someone, we are making that deposit not just for ourselves, but we are also increasing the deposit of trust within the team. And so we ask the question, this is not working. Let's talk about why it's not working. Let's find the solution together. It's not a me. We are giving them clarity because we want the team to succeed. It's not a one person work, but it's the team. How do we build that genuine relationship? Yes, I am by nature a person of empathy, but let's meet at that intersection of empathy and challenge. So we meet at that intersection right here of empathy and challenge. So let's talk about part two. Let's talk about the second aspect of how, as first-time managers, as mid-level managers, we can use these frameworks. We can move from those who hate conflict, the three-part architecture of those who hate conflict, as a manager who hate conflict, to having ownership, to developing ownership, to developing accountability. And so let's talk about what that looks like. I'm trying to see who is online at the same time while we are here. Part two talks about externalized accountability. So here's the thing when it comes on to having difficult conversations with our team members, that it's not a personal battle. It's not a personal battle between you and the person. It is a way to encourage openness, to encourage accountability. It's not just me saying this is it and that's it. No, it's us coming together. We can use systems like, objectives and key results. What are our objectives? What are our key results that we want out of this? And so we know, instead of being the dictator or the enforcer, we now become the coach, as I shared earlier. We become the coach in the process. So the manager and the employee, as a first-time manager, as the team member, we work together to talk about, okay, what is it that we want to see happen? We're going to share the input. We're going to use a scoreboard to keep everybody accountable. Because when we shift, when we see that happening, we all take that accountability. And so we are helping the team, we're coaching the team, we're helping them to hit their own targets as well. Because the data is now visible to everyone. And so we move from the role of enforcer to the role of coach. Because again, it's not a personal battle. This is not about me versus them. It is about us as a team. And so that is the second way we can, for those of us who hate conflict, can take ownership of how we have difficult conversations with, whether it is one-on-one team members or we're having a discussion as a whole, as a team. We use these strategies, we use these frameworks. The first part that we talked about is practice radical candor. Yes, we are empathetic by nature, but we also challenge persons. And we understand that, again, it's not a personal battle. It's not about me picking on you, but it's about how do we as a team reach our goals. effectively. And then the third part of what we are going to be talking about is the care framework. This is the third part of the architecture framework that we are talking about. The care framework. And so instead of us avoiding these conversations, here's a 4-step system that we can also employ to help us, to help to hold ourselves and to help to hold our team members accountable. So the first one is to communicate expectations. You see, we can't just say to the person, you need to be more proactive. Let's define what that looks like. Let's define the output. Let's define what that looks like. For example, if you're going to tell me I need to be more proactive, I can say, instead of saying that, I can say, okay, Tanique, I'd like you to take lead on the presentation next week, Thursday. That is communicating the expectation. That is telling me exactly what needs to happen. So I am communicating with care. I am sharing. I'm not just giving an instruction, an ambiguous instruction, but I am giving an instruction, or I'm having this conversation. I'm showing that, okay, this is how we're going to hold each other accountable. So I'm not just telling you what to do. I'm sharing with you, all right, Tanique, yes, I needed to be more proactive. This is how we can do it. This is how we can help you to grow in this capacity. And after we have established that, after we have communicated the expectation with clarity, we're going to acknowledge the feelings. So again, it's not about judgment. It's not a personal battle. It's not a personal battle. And so when we acknowledge our feelings, or we acknowledge the feelings in the room, we actually opens up space for persons to be honest with us. And it shows, again, yes, we care about them as a person, not just as a performer. So we can say to this person, I've noticed your deadlines have been very close lately. Like, tell me, how are things going on your end? What are some of the challenges that you are having, whether it is personal and or professional or both? So we acknowledge the feelings in the room. We are not nitpicking on the person. It's not about judging the person. Again, we talk about evaluate to motivate. So we're opening up space. This is where our emotional intelligence leadership skill set comes in. Because many empathetic leaders, many persons who are on the empath, what we would call it now, line, many persons are on that empath line. They have a lot of feelings. They carry feelings. And sometimes we as empath, we wear our feelings on our face. And so as a leader, it is about not wearing so much your feelings on your face, but learning how to acknowledge your feelings, learning how to, okay, regulate your feelings, and also understanding the feeling of the other person that you are having this conversation with, because there might be something that's happening with them within their space, within their life, and it's impacting. Why is it that their deadlines are always so close? Maybe it is that there are too many projects happening at the same time. So again, this opens space for honesty, and it shows that we care about the person, not just as a number, but we care about the person as a person. The R in the care framework is reinforce the shared goals. So let's bring it back to the why. Let's bring it back to the why of why we do what we do. And to remind them that we are both on the same team. We're not fighting against each other. We're fighting to win together. And so remind them that we both want this project to succeed, because when people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, they're more likely to take ownership. So we refocus on the why. When we get into those difficult conversations, when we get into, okay, I've noticed that your deadlines have been close lately, and you're saying this with without empathy, without understanding the context, then it when we talk about reinforcing the goals, reinforcing the why, it's going to be a little difficult. But when we come and we acknowledge the feelings in the room and we reinforce, now, okay, now that I understand why your deadlines have been so close, now let's talk about the why. Let's go back to, okay, why we do what we do. This project symbolizes that our team is successful. Whatever success looks like for your team, we want this project to succeed. It's all of us that will look good when this project is successful. And thereby we reinforce the why. We are not targeting the person. So again, it's not a personal battle. And the E in the care framework is evaluate together. Evaluate together. So let's bring it home. Let's ask, all right, what does resolution look like for both of us going forward? What does that look like for both of us going forward? We're co-creating the resolution. It's not just dictating. And this could be for that person, because yes, we have those challenging persons, we have those assertive persons. And so when you have those assertive persons, you use this framework with them just the same. We're using this framework with that person we consider to be a difficult person, that their attitude may be diminishing the morale of the team, but we ask them the question, we communicate the expectation, because they're always so assertive. You said, okay, all right, Sanique, again, I want you to take on the lead in the presentation next week. Give them something to look forward to. Give them that opportunity to showcase themselves, to showcase their talent. Acknowledging the feeling, acknowledging how they feel, why they feel what they feel, reinforcing that this is not a one-man show, but this is a togetherness, reinforcing the why we do what we do. This is a shared success. And then we're going to evaluate together, okay, what's the resolution? What does resolution look like for both of us? What steps can we take together? What steps are we willing to take together to resolve the challenges that we find on our team? Because persons are saying that you are so assertive, or you are always hugging the meeting, or you're always, so what are the solutions? Because we're going to co-create. We are partners in this. And so because we are partners in this, that is where we're going to, again, build trust, not just for the short term, but we're going to build trust for a long-term partnership with this person. And so what are our key takeaways that we have had from this session? What are our key takeaways? Because we're building a legacy of impact as managers, as leaders, because we're stepping into that wealthy mindset leadership. We are building impact. We, again, we go from fixing to listening. So the goal of having the conversation for yourself as well as for that assertive team member, it's not about winning. It's not to win, but it's to make people feel safe enough. It's about deep listening, responding from a place of service rather than ego. It's about conducting that self awareness check when we're having those difficult conversations. Because, yes, those difficult conversations, they can trigger unconscious emotional responses within us. And so we want to shut down. We may become passive aggressive because there are some, again, unconscious emotional responses that are happening when we are faced with having these difficult conversations. And so, again, we do that self check, that self awareness check. That's where we draw on, again, we go back into our leadership bank and we draw on our emotional intelligence reserve. And we ask ourselves, am I reacting from ego or am I responding from service? Because this self awareness check helps us to stay calm during that exchange. So instead of me being passive aggressive towards this assertive person, I calm myself before going into that exchange. I do my self check, put myself, instead of in a fight or flight mode, I calm down my nervous system before I go into that space. Breathe, do those breathing exercises, stretch. Those are some of the things that we can literally do to calm our nervous system when we are going into those difficult conversations. And understanding that this is a shared ownership. This is a shared ownership. We are building a legacy of impact. So this is a shared ownership. So it's now shifting the burden from just me as the manager, just you as the manager, finding a solution to a collaborative partnership where we co-create the next steps together. And because of that, we're going to be transparent. We're going to be honest about our own intentions, our own limitations, and that is where we create psychological safety for not just for that person, but we are creating it for ourselves and for the rest of the team. And so avoiding those difficult conversations is an active choice that results in delayed decision making and a culture where poor performance becomes the baseline. But when we do use these techniques, when we do use these frameworks, when we do employ these frameworks, we are actually making deposits. We're actually making a significant deposit of trust into our leadership account. And so we are moving away from the withdrawals caused by silence and avoidance, and we are making intentional deposits where psychological safety and high performance and shared ownership, because we're creating that next step, we're building that legacy of impact with each other, becomes that space for us. And so I want to say to you that leadership isn't a sprint. It's a marathon that requires you to stretch out your mind daily. Because here's the thing, we do not rise to the level of our title. We fall to the level of our mindset. And so the more we make deposits of clarity and trust, the more we'll rise to the level of our mindset. And so, if you are tired, if you're tired of being a charismatic avoider, and I know I get it, I've been there, tell you, I'm walking through that. If you're ready to stop making withdrawals and start making deposits of clarity and trust, the work that we went through today is just part of the roadmap. It's just a tiny fraction of the roadmap. And so, if you are willing to do that, if you are tired of being that charismatic avoider, you can join the waitlist for the next MVP Leadership Accelerator program. It's a 4-week live intensive. It's not recorded. It's not a pre-recorded session. It's live where we go through scenarios just like these. And we build our specific, at the end of that 4 weeks, we're going to build our specific leadership manifesto and a 90-day action plan that is based on your assessment data. And so if you want to be on the wait list, drop the word ownership. Drop the word ownership in the chat, in the comments, or send me a DM, send me a direct message, and I will get in touch with you to join the wait list. So again, I want to say thank you so much for joining me on this series. Remember, MVP confidence is currency. So let's stop avoiding the hard stuff and start building. Let's start building a legacy of impact, because as leaders, we are cultivating a wealthy leader's mindset. Have yourself a wonderful week, wonderful rest of the week, leaders, and I will see you next week on another episode of Finding Freedom Through Confidence, where MVP confidence is currency.